The needle slipped through Willa Thompson's calloused finger for the third time that morning, and she barely flinched as blood welled up and stained the white linen wedding dress spread across her lap. She pressed her thumb against the wound, watching her own blood mix with all the other tiny crimson spots that dotted the fabric from weeks of late-night sewing, and wondered if the bride would notice, or if she would be too busy staring into her groom's eyes to see the pieces of someone else's exhaustion woven into her special day. Laramie, Wyoming in the spring of 1878 was a town that ran on hope and hard work, and Willa Thompson provided both without asking for either in return. Her little shop on 3rd Street had a painted wooden sign that read, "Thompson's Fine Tailoring and Repairs," but everyone in town just called it Willa's Place, because when you needed something fixed, whether it was a torn work shirt or a christening gown or new curtains for the saloon, you went to Willa. She would take your order with a tired smile, quote you a fair price, and have it done exactly when she promised, even if it meant she did not sleep for 2 days straight to make it happen. The morning sun streamed through her shop window, illuminating the dust motes that danced between bolts of fabric stacked against every available wall. Willa had been up since before dawn, had eaten nothing but cold coffee and a heel of bread, and her lower back ached from hunching over her sewing table. She was 24 years old but felt ancient in her bones, worn down by responsibility and the endless needs of a town that took and never thought to ask what she might need in return. The bell above her door chimed and Willa looked up to see Martha Henderson bustling in with her 3 children in tow. The eldest boy had torn his Sunday pants again, and Martha was already apologizing before the door even closed behind her. "I am so sorry to bother you, Willa. I know you are busy with the Carver wedding dress, but Timothy caught his trousers on a fence post and just ripped them clean through. His father will tan his hide if he has to miss church on Sunday, and these are his only good pants. Can you possibly fix them by Saturday?" Willa set down the wedding dress carefully and took the torn trousers from Martha's outstretched hands. The rip ran from the knee almost to the waistband, and it would take at least 2 hours of careful work to mend it properly. She had 3 other orders due by the end of the week and had already promised herself she would get a full night's sleep tonight, but Martha was looking at her with such desperate hope that Willa heard herself saying yes before she could think better of it. "Of course, Martha. I will have them ready by Saturday morning." The relief that flooded Martha's face was worth the exhaustion, or at least that was what Willa told herself as she added the trousers to the growing pile of work that surrounded her like a fabric fortress. Martha pressed $2 into her hand, which was far more than the job was worth, but Willa had learned not to argue when people overpaid her. The town knew she undercharged, knew she often did not charge widows or struggling families at all, and folks had their own ways of trying to balance the scales. After Martha left, Willa returned to the wedding dress, but her eyes kept drifting to the window and the mountains beyond. She had been born in Philadelphia, had come west with her parents when she was 16, chasing the promise of land and opportunity that seemed to glow like gold in every newspaper back east. Her father had planned to start a cattle ranch, but he had died of fever their first winter in Wyoming, and her mother had followed him 6 months later, leaving Willa alone with a shop lease her father had signed and a sewing machine that had been her mother's most prized possession. 8 years later, she was still here, still sewing, still surviving but not quite living. The women of Laramie loved to tell her she was such a dear, so helpful. What would they do without her? But none of them seemed to notice that Willa wore the same 3 dresses in rotation because she never had time to sew herself anything new. None of them seemed to see that she was disappearing, thread by thread, piece by piece, mending everyone else while her own seams came slowly undone. The door chimed again an hour later, and Willa glanced up expecting another customer with another urgent request. Instead, she found herself staring at the largest man she had ever seen standing in her doorway, his shoulders so broad they nearly filled the frame. He had to duck his head to enter, and when he straightened to his full height inside her shop, he seemed to fill the entire space with his presence. He had long, dark hair that fell past his shoulders, streaked with sun-bleached lighter strands, and a thick beard that could not quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His arms, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his worn flannel shirt, were roped with muscle and covered in old scars that spoke of a life lived hard and rough. His hands, when he pulled off his hat, were massive, the kind of hands that could snap a man's neck or fell a tree with an axe, and Willa felt something unfamiliar flutter in her chest as he looked at her with eyes the color of a winter storm. "You the seamstress?" His voice was deep and rough, like rocks tumbling down a mountainside, and there was something almost gentle in the way he asked, as if he was afraid his size alone might frighten her. "I am Willa Thompson." She stood up, suddenly aware of how small and rumpled she must look, and brushed absently at the bloodstains on her apron. "What can I do for you?" He held out a heavy wool coat, and she could see immediately that it was well made but old, the seams splitting at the shoulders and elbows. "Need this mended before winter. I know it is still spring, but I figured I would take care of it now while I am in town for supplies. Name is Orson Oakes." Willa took the coat, her fingers brushing against his for just a moment, and she was struck by how warm his skin was, how calloused his palms. Working hands. Capable hands. She examined the coat more closely, noting the quality of the original stitching, the careful repairs that had been attempted and mostly failed. "You have been trying to fix this yourself," she observed. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth beneath that wild beard. "I am better with axes than needles. Most people are." She carried the coat to her work table and spread it out, mentally calculating the work required. "I can have this ready in a week. No rush. I will not need it until the snow comes." He shifted his weight, and Willa realized with surprise that this massive man was nervous. "How much?" $3. It was her standard price for this kind of work, though she probably should have charged more given the extent of the repairs needed. Orson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out $3 silver and then added 2 more. "For your trouble." "It is not any trouble. The price I quoted is fair." "I am sure it is." He pushed the extra coins toward her anyway. "But I live up in the mountains. Only come to town maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I appreciate you taking the time to do good work." There was something in his eyes when he said it, a kind of understanding that made Willa feel seen in a way she had not felt seen in longer than she could remember. He was not just another customer handing her work and expecting her to make it happen like magic. He saw the effort, acknowledged the skill, respected the craft. "Thank you," she said quietly, and she meant it for more than just the money. Orson nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You should eat something. You look like you are about to fall over." The observation was so unexpected and so true that Willa laughed, a short, surprised sound that felt rusty in her throat. "I will. Eventually." He frowned, clearly not satisfied with that answer, but he did not push. He just settled his hat back on his head and ducked out the door, leaving Willa standing alone in her shop, holding his coat and feeling strangely unbalanced, as if the whole world had tilted just slightly to the left. She did not eat lunch that day, too focused on finishing the Carver wedding dress, but that evening when she finally locked up her shop and dragged herself up the narrow stairs to her tiny apartment above it, She found a covered basket sitting outside her door. Inside was fresh bread, still warm, a chunk of yellow cheese, 3 apples, and a jar of honey. There was no note, but Willa knew without asking who had left it. She carried the basket inside and sat down at her small table, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she cried. Not sad tears exactly, but something deeper and more complicated, a release of pressure she had not known she was carrying. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen her struggle and had done something about it, had offered help without making her ask for it. Willa ate the bread and cheese, and thought about storm-colored eyes and hands strong enough to fell trees, but gentle enough to leave food for a stranger. She thought about the way Orson Oakes had looked at her, really looked, and had seen past the helpful seamstress to the exhausted woman underneath. And she thought, for the first time in a very long time, that maybe she was not quite as alone as she had believed. The next morning, Willa woke feeling marginally more rested than usual and immediately felt guilty about it. She had orders to complete, people depending on her, and here she was sleeping past dawn like some kind of layabout. She dressed quickly in one of her worn work dresses and hurried downstairs to her shop, already mentally organizing the day's tasks. The Carver wedding dress was nearly complete, just needed the hem finished and the final details added. Timothy Henderson's pants were next on the list, and then there was a whole stack of shirts from the railroad workers that needed buttons replaced and tiers patched. And now, Orson Oakes' coat, which she found herself looking forward to working on, though she could not quite explain why. She had just settled in with the wedding dress when the bell chimed and Elizabeth Carver herself swept in, her mother following close behind. Elizabeth was 19, pretty and excited and so in love with her fiancé that she seemed to glow from the inside. She had been in 3 times already to check on the progress of her dress, and Willa pasted on her practiced smile as the bride-to-be clapped her hands together. "Is it done? Can I see it? Oh, I am so nervous." Willa stood and lifted the dress carefully, holding it up so Elizabeth and her mother could see. The girl gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, and tears immediately started streaming down her face. "It is perfect. It is absolutely perfect. Oh, Willa, you are a miracle worker, Mrs." Carver was crying too, reaching out to touch the delicate lace sleeves with reverent fingers. "My mother's wedding dress, transformed completely. I never thought we would be able to salvage enough of it to make something new, but you managed it beautifully." Willa felt a warm glow of satisfaction that almost made up for the aching in her fingers and the bloodstains she had carefully hidden with strategic embroidery. This was why she did what she did, these moments when her work brought joy to people. It mattered. She mattered, even if only as the woman who could transform old fabric into new dreams. Elizabeth tried on the dress, and it fit perfectly because Willa had measured her 3 times and had taken in the waist twice when the excited bride had lost weight from wedding nerves. They cried some more, thanked her profusely, and Mrs. Carver paid her the remaining balance plus a generous tip. After they left, Willa carefully wrapped the dress in clean muslin and set it aside for them to collect the day before the wedding. She was just starting on Timothy's pants when the door opened again, and Sarah Mitchell came in, looking flustered and guilty. Sarah was a widow with 5 children and barely 2 pennies to rub together, and Willa already knew what she was going to ask before she opened her mouth. "Willa, I am so sorry to ask, but Mary outgrew her only dress that fits for church, and I just do not have the money right now to pay for a new one. Could you possibly make her something simple and let me pay you in installments? I can give you 50 cents a week until it is paid off." Mary Mitchell was 8 years old and small for her age, and the thought of her not having a proper dress made Willa's heart hurt. She should say no. She had enough charity cases already, and her own rent was due in 2 weeks. But Sarah was looking at her with such desperate pride, trying so hard not to beg, and Willa thought about being alone in the world with no one to help and how terrifying that felt. "I have some fabric left over from another project," Willa lied smoothly. "It will not cost much at all. Bring Mary by tomorrow and I will measure her, and you can pay me whatever you can afford whenever you can afford it." The relief and gratitude on Sarah's face made the lie worth it, even though Willa knew she would end up using her own limited fabric and would probably never see full payment. Sarah thanked her repeatedly and promised to have Mary stop by the next day, and after she left, Willa sat down heavily and pressed her hands against her tired eyes. She was so busy taking care of everyone else that she had not noticed the holes wearing through her own stockings, had not realized that she was down to her last quarter-pound of coffee, and had been rationing it carefully for a week. She was mending everyone but herself, and the irony was so sharp it cut. The rest of the week passed in a blur of needle and thread. Willa finished Timothy's pants, started Mary Mitchell's dress, repaired 17 work shirts for the railroad crew, let out 2 pairs of trousers for men who had gained weight over the winter, took in 3 dresses for women who had lost weight, and hemmed new curtains for the general store. She worked until her fingers bled, until her eyes stung from strain, until she was so tired she sometimes fell asleep right there at her sewing table and woke with fabric impressions on her cheek. On Saturday evening, after Martha Henderson had collected Timothy's perfectly mended pants with more tears and thanks, Willa finally allowed herself to look at Orson Oakes' coat. She ran her fingers over the heavy wool, noticing the careful way it had been constructed, the attention to detail that spoke of a craftsperson who took pride in their work. This was not some mass-produced garment from back east. This had been made by hand, probably by his mother or wife, made with love for someone who lived a hard life in a hard place. She wondered about him as she worked, this mountain man who had looked at her and seen her exhaustion, who had left food without making a fuss about it. The men in town mostly did not notice her at all, except as the helpful seamstress who fixed their clothes. The few who had noticed had wanted a wife to keep house and bear children, had been disappointed when Willa had turned them down because she could not imagine adding a husband's needs to the endless list of everyone else's needs. But Orson Oakes had not looked at her like that. He had looked at her like she was a person, tired and overworked and maybe in need of a little help herself. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way that Willa barely knew what to do with the feeling it created in her chest. She took her time with his coat, far more time than the job really required. She reinforced every seam, replaced the worn lining, even added hidden inner pockets because she thought they might be useful for a man who spent most of his time in the mountains. She used her best thread and her smallest, strongest stitches, and when she finally finished late Sunday night, she stepped back and examined her work with satisfaction. It was the best repair job she had done in months, maybe years. The coat looked almost new, and it would last Orson Oakes through many more winters in the high country. She folded it carefully and set it aside, and tried to ignore the small voice in her head that whispered she had put so much extra effort in, because she wanted him to come back, wanted to see those storm-colored eyes again, and feel that moment of being truly seen. 2 more weeks passed. Willa finished Mary Mitchell's dress and delivered it personally because Sarah could not get away from her children to pick it up. The little girl's face when she tried on the new dress, with its neat tucks and careful embroidery, made every hour of unpaid work worth it. Willa accepted $2 that Sarah counted out in nickels and pennies, and assured her it was the full price. knowing she had spent at least $3 on fabric alone. She mended and sewed and altered and created, and the people of Laramie kept coming through her door with their needs and their gratitude and their assumption that Willa Thompson would always be there to help them. And she was. She always was. Because what else was she supposed to do? Say no. Disappoint them. Let them down. She could not remember the last time she had taken a full day off. Could not remember the last time she had done something just for herself, just for the joy of it. Her mother's sewing machine, which had once represented possibility and independence, now felt like a shackle that kept her chained to this shop, to this endless cycle of work and exhaustion, and more work. On a Thursday afternoon in early June, when the heat was just starting to build and Willa was struggling through a particularly complicated alteration on a dress for the mayor's wife, the bell above her door chimed, and she looked up to see Orson Oakes ducking through the doorway again. Her heart did something strange and fluttery in her chest, and she set down her work quickly, suddenly aware that she looked even worse than usual. She had not slept well in days, had not had time to wash her hair in a week, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of cold water could hide. "Mr. Oakes, your coat is ready. I figured it might be." He moved into the shop with that same surprising grace she had noticed before, as if he was very aware of his size and careful not to knock anything over. "But I am not here to collect it yet. I actually wanted to ask you something." Willa waited, her hands twisting nervously in her apron. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just gray but had flecks of blue in them, like storm clouds with patches of sky showing through. "I noticed your roof is leaking." She blinked, surprised. "What? Your roof?" "The shingles on the north corner are coming loose, and there is water damage on the exterior wall. Next good rain, you are going to have a leak, probably right over your living space upstairs." Willa had not even noticed, too busy working inside to look at the outside of her building. "Oh. I will have to hire someone to fix it then." "I can fix it for you. I am in town for a few more days getting supplies and I have experience with roof work." She shook her head automatically. "I cannot afford to pay you what that would cost. Roof work is expensive. I am not asking you to pay me." He said it simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You did good work on my coat. I saw it when I walked by your shop the other day, saw you had it hanging up ready. You did not just patch it, you restored it. That is quality work, probably cost you more time than what I paid. So I will fix your roof and we will call it even." Willa stared at him, trying to process this. Men did not just offer to do expensive labor for free. There was always a catch, always something they wanted in return. Why would you do that? Orson was quiet for a moment, studying her with those intense eyes. When he spoke, his voice was gentle despite its roughness. "Because you take care of everyone else and it does not look like anyone is taking care of you. And because I can see you are drowning and I know what that feels like." The words hit Willa like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She opened her mouth to protest, to insist that she was fine, that she did not need help, but nothing came out, because he was right. She was drowning. She had been drowning for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe. Her voice cracked. "I do not understand. You do not even know me. I know you give more than you have. I know you are wearing yourself down to nothing trying to help everyone who asks. And I know that sometimes the people who do the most for others are the ones who have the hardest time asking for help themselves." He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "I live alone up in the mountains, and I only come to town a few times a year. But I was not always alone, and I remember what it was like to watch someone I cared about work herself to death because she could not say no. I could not help her, but maybe I can help you, if you will let me." There was old pain in his words, a grief that he carried quietly but deeply. And Willa understood suddenly that Orson Oakes knew exactly what he was looking at when he looked at her. He had watched someone else disappear the same way, thread by thread, and he was trying to stop it from happening again. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, you can fix the roof." He nodded, satisfied, and some of the tension left his massive shoulders. "I will start tomorrow morning." True to his word, Orson showed up just after dawn the next day with a ladder, tools, and new shingles that he must have purchased specially. Willa watched from her shop window as he climbed up onto her roof, with the kind of easy confidence that spoke of someone comfortable with heights and hard physical work. Even from this distance, she could see the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he worked, the casual strength in every movement. She tried to focus on her sewing, but she kept finding herself distracted by the sounds of work above her head, the steady rhythm of hammer against nail. It was strange having someone do something for her, strange and uncomfortable and deeply unfamiliar. She was the one who did things for others. She was the helper, the fixer, the solution to everyone else's problems. Around mid-morning, she finally gave in to impulse and made a pot of coffee and some sandwiches from the last of her bread and the cheese Orson had left her weeks ago. She carried them outside and called up to the roof. "Mr. Oakes, I thought you might want some lunch." His face appeared over the edge of the roof, streaked with sweat and dirt, and he smiled at her. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger and less guarded. "That would be welcome. Thank you." He climbed down and sat on her back step, and Willa sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. Up close, she could smell the scent of pine and leather and honest sweat, could see the old scars on his forearms more clearly. One looked like a bear claw, another like a knife wound that had healed badly. "How long have you lived in the mountains?" she asked as he ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had learned not to waste food. 5 years, give or take. I worked as a trapper before that, traveled all over. But after, he paused, choosing his words carefully. After I lost someone important to me, I needed to be alone for a while. Found a good valley with fresh water and game, built myself a cabin. I like the quiet. Do you ever get lonely? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes. But there is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone can be peaceful. Being lonely is when you are surrounded by people but still feel like no one sees you. Willa felt those words settle into her chest like stones. Yes, that is exactly what it is like. Orson turned to look at her fully, and she found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his eyes. "How long has it been since you took a day off, a real day off, not just working on your own projects?" She had to think about it. "I do not remember. A year maybe, maybe longer." "That is not sustainable. I do not have a choice. People need me." "And what happens when you collapse from exhaustion? Who will help them then?" His voice was not judgmental, just practical, stating a fact. "You cannot pour from an empty cup, Willa." She wanted to argue with him, wanted to insist that she was fine, but the words would not come. Because he was right. She was running on fumes, had been for longer than she wanted to admit, and eventually she was going to break. "I do not know how to say no," she admitted quietly. "They need help and I can give it, so how can I refuse?" "By remembering that you are a person, not just a tool for everyone else to use. You have needs too, you matter too." He finished his sandwich and stood up, stretching. "When I finish this roof, I am taking you somewhere." "What? Where?" "It is a surprise. But you are going to close your shop for one afternoon and come with me, and you are not going to work or worry or think about all the things you need to do. You are just going to exist for a few hours. Can you do that?" Willa felt panic flutter in her chest at the thought of closing her shop in the middle of the day, of disappointing people who might need her. But she also felt something else, something that felt almost like hope. I can try. Orson finished the roof by early evening, replacing all the damaged shingles and checking every other potential weak point while he was up there. When he finally climbed down for the last time, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He showed Willa what he had done, pointing out the new shingles and explaining how they would keep the water out. Should last you another 10 years at least, if you keep an eye on it. And I sealed up a few places where mice were getting in, so you should not have that problem anymore either. Willa felt overwhelmed by the generosity of it, by the hours of work he had put in just to help her. I do not know how to thank you. You do not need to thank me. Just promise me you will think about what I said about taking care of yourself. He collected his tools and started toward his horse, then paused and turned back. Tomorrow is Sunday. Close your shop after church, put a sign on the door, and meet me at the livery stable at noon. Wear practical clothes. Before she could ask what he meant or argue or make excuses, he swung up onto his horse and rode off, leaving Willa standing in the gathering dusk, feeling unbalanced and uncertain and strangely excited. She went to church the next morning, as she did every Sunday, and sat in her usual spot in the back pew where she could work on hand sewing during the longer prayers. Several people stopped her after the service to ask about their orders, and she assured them everything was on schedule, even though she had not slept more than 4 hours and still had 3 projects that were overdue. At 11:45, feeling guilty and reckless and more alive than she had in months, Willa walked to the livery stable. She had changed into her oldest dress, one that she used for dyeing fabric and would not be ruined by dirt or adventure, and she had braided her hair back tightly. Her heart was pounding, though whether from excitement or anxiety she could not tell. Orson was waiting with his horse and another one, a gentle-looking mare with a sweet face. He helped Willa mount, his hands careful and steady on her waist, and she tried not to think about how strong he was, how easily he lifted her. "Where are we going?" she asked as they rode out of town. "You will see." They rode for about an hour, following a trail that wound up into the foothills. Willa had not been outside of Laramie in over a year, had not realized how much she missed the open space and the clean air and the feeling of going somewhere new. Orson rode beside her, not talking much but pointing out things occasionally, a hawk circling overhead, wildflowers blooming in a meadow, the tracks of a deer in the soft earth. Finally, they crested a ridge and Orson stopped, gesturing ahead. There. Willa looked and gasped. Spread out before them was a hidden valley, green and lush, with a stream running through it that caught the sunlight and threw it back in silver flashes. Wildflowers covered the ground in a riot of colors, purple and yellow and white, and the mountains rose up on all sides like protective walls. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I found this place a few years ago. I come here sometimes when I need to remember that there is more to life than just survival." He dismounted and helped her down, and they walked together to the stream bank. Orson had brought food in his saddlebag, real food, fresh bread and cheese and apples and even a jar of honey. They sat on the grass and ate, and Willa realized she was actually hungry, genuinely hungry, not just eating because she had to in order to keep working. "Tell me about yourself," Orson said. "Not about your work, about you. What do you like? What makes you happy?" Willa opened her mouth to answer and realized she did not know. When had she last done something just because it made her happy? When had she last even thought about her own happiness as something that mattered? "I used to like reading," she said slowly, reaching back into memories that felt dusty from disuse. "Before we came west, I would read everything I could get my hands on. Stories, mostly. Adventures and romances and mysteries. I liked getting lost in other people's lives for a while. When was the last time you read a book? I cannot remember. I am always too tired and I need the lamp light for sewing after dark. Orson made a thoughtful sound. What else? I liked music. My mother played the piano, and sometimes she would sing while she worked. I cannot carry a tune to save my life, but I liked listening. Willa felt tears prick her eyes. I have not thought about her in so long. I have been so busy just surviving that I forgot to remember her properly. Grief is like that sometimes. It waits until you have space to feel it. He leaned back on his elbows, looking up at the blue sky. My wife died 6 years ago. Her name was Anna. She was the hardest working person I ever met, always doing for others, always helping. She got sick one winter, just a little cold at first, but she would not rest because people needed her. By the time I made her see a doctor, it was too late. Pneumonia. She was gone in a week. I am so sorry. Willa could hear the old pain in his voice, grief that had settled into something he carried with him always. I blamed myself for a long time. Thought I should have forced her to rest, should have seen how bad it was getting. But the truth is, Anna would not have listened. She could not say no to people who needed help, even when it was killing her. He turned his head to look at Willa. When I saw you in your shop that day, you reminded me so much of her, working yourself to death for people who do not even realize they are asking too much. Willa felt something break open inside her chest, a dam that had been holding back years of exhaustion and loneliness and desperate need. I do not know how to stop. This is who I am. The helpful one. The one who fixes things. If I am not that, then what am I? You are a woman named Willa Thompson who deserves to be more than just useful. You deserve to be happy, to be rested, to be cared for the way you care for everyone else. Orson sat up and moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I am not saying this to upset you or to criticize. I am saying it because I see you drowning and I am offering you a hand if you want to take it. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why do you care what happens to me? He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because you deserve someone caring about you. Because I know what it costs to watch someone disappear while everyone around them just keeps taking. And because, he paused, then continued more quietly. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing. Someone strong and kind and so damn tired, and I want to help, if you will let me. Willa turned to face him fully, and for the first time in years, she let someone see her, really see her. Not the helpful seamstress, not the woman who could fix anything, but the exhausted, lonely, frightened person underneath. I am so tired, she admitted, and her voice broke on the words. I am so tired, Orson, and I do not know how to stop being tired. Then rest, right here, right now. Just for an hour. Let the world manage without you for just a little while. It felt impossible, felt selfish and wrong, but Willa found herself lying back on the soft grass, the sun warm on her face and the sound of the stream gentle in her ears. Orson lay down beside her, not touching but close enough that she could hear him breathing, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Willa Thompson let herself just exist. She must have fallen asleep because when she opened her eyes, the sun had moved significantly across the sky and Orson was sitting beside her, reading a small book with worn pages. He looked up when she stirred and smiled. Welcome back. You slept for almost 2 hours. Willa sat up quickly, panic flooding through her. 2 hours. I need to get back. I have work to do, and I told the Johnsons I would have their curtains done by tomorrow, and breathe. Orson's hand on her shoulder was gentle but firm, grounding her. The world did not end while you slept. The Johnsons will get their curtains. Everything will be fine. She wanted to argue, but the truth was she felt better than she had in months. The knot of tension between her shoulder blades had eased slightly, and her head felt clearer. 2 hours of real sleep in the sunshine had done more for her than weeks of restless nights catching an hour here and there at her sewing table. "I am not used to this," she said quietly. "Taking time for myself. I know, but you need to learn. Because this," he gestured around at the beautiful valley, "this is what life should feel like sometimes. Peaceful, easy, not always a struggle." They rode back to Laramie as the sun was setting, and Willa felt something shifting inside her, some small seed of change taking root. When they reached her shop, Orson helped her dismount, his hands lingering on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "I am heading back to my cabin tomorrow morning," he said, "but I will be back in town in about 6 weeks. Will you think about what I said, about taking care of yourself?" "I will think about it." Willa surprised herself by reaching out and touching his arm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt. "Thank you, Orson. For the roof, for today, for seeing me. I have not felt seen in a very long time." Something in his eyes shifted, warmed, and he covered her hand with his own massive one. "I see you, Willa Thompson, and what I see is someone remarkable. Do not forget that." He rode away into the gathering darkness, and Willa stood outside her shop for a long time, watching until he disappeared from view. Something had changed today, some fundamental shift in the way she saw herself and her place in the world. She was still tired, still overwhelmed, still drowning in work and obligations. But now she had a lifeline, someone who saw her struggle and offered help without expecting anything in return. The next few weeks were hard. Willa tried to implement small changes, tried to say no occasionally, or at least to quote more realistic timelines for her work. Some people understood, others did not, and Willa felt their disappointment like a physical weight. But she kept thinking about what Orson had said, about not being able to pour from an empty cup, and she forced herself to take breaks, to eat regular meals, to close her shop at a decent hour at least a few nights a week. She finished the Johnsons' curtains only 1 day late. She turned down a request to make 6 bridesmaids' dresses in 2 weeks because it was physically impossible. She started charging closer to what her work was actually worth, instead of underpricing everything out of guilt. And slowly, gradually, she began to feel a little less like she was drowning. 6 weeks later, on a hot July afternoon, Orson Oakes rode back into Laramie. Willa saw him from her shop window and felt her heart leap in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude, and everything to do with the way his broad shoulders moved as he dismounted, the way his hair caught the sunlight, the way he smiled when he saw her. He came into the shop carrying a package wrapped in oilcloth. "I brought you something." Willa unwrapped it carefully and found a stack of books, well worn but clearly cared for. Adventure novels, romances, a collection of poetry. She looked up at Orson with tears in her eyes. "I remembered you said you liked to read. I do not have much use for these up in the mountains. Thought you might enjoy them. I cannot take your books. They are not really mine. They belong to Anna. She would have wanted someone to read them, someone who would appreciate them." He shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. "I also wanted to ask if you would have dinner with me tonight. I am staying at the boarding house for a few days, and I thought maybe we could spend some time together. If you want." Willa looked at this enormous, gentle man who had seen her at her worst and had chosen to help instead of taking advantage, who had given her space to rest and books to read and the simple gift of being seen. And she realized that what she felt was not just gratitude. It was something deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. "I would like that very much." They had dinner at the boarding house dining room, and Willa discovered that Orson was surprisingly easy to talk to once he relaxed. He told her about his life in the mountains, about the rhythm of the seasons and the peace of solitude. He talked about his childhood in Ohio, about learning to trap from his father, about meeting Anna and falling in love and building a life together before losing her too soon. Willa told him about Philadelphia, about her parents' dreams of the West and their tragic deaths. She told him about learning to sew from her mother, about the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from raw materials. She told him about the loneliness of being the person everyone needed but no one really knew. I think people do not realize how much they ask because they see you as always capable, always strong, Orson said. They do not understand that you can be strong and still need help sometimes. I am learning that. It is hard, but I am learning. He smiled at her across the table, and Willa felt warmth spread through her chest. You look better than you did 6 weeks ago, less tired. I have been trying to take better care of myself. Small things mostly, but they add up. I actually closed my shop for a full day last week and did nothing but read one of the books you gave me. It felt incredibly selfish, but also wonderful. It is not selfish to take care of yourself. It is necessary. He reached across the table and took her hand, his massive palm dwarfing hers. I am proud of you, Willa. I know how hard it is to change habits, especially ones that are driven by guilt and obligation. His touch sent electricity up her arm, and Willa realized with sudden clarity that she wanted more of this. More time with Orson, more conversations, more moments of being seen and valued for who she was rather than what she could do. She wanted his hand in hers, wanted to know what it would feel like to be held by those strong arms, to feel safe and protected and cared for. Will you stay in town for a while? She asked, trying to keep the hope out of her voice. A few days. I need to resupply and make some repairs to my gear, but I could stay longer if you wanted me to. I want you to. The words came out before she could second-guess them, bold and honest. I would like to spend more time with you, Orson. His smile was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Then I will stay. Over the next week, Orson and Willa fell into an easy pattern. He would help her in the mornings, moving heavy bolts of fabric or reaching things from high shelves, or simply keeping her company while she worked. In the afternoons, he would work on his own projects, repairing his saddle or sharpening his tools, and Willa found she liked having him there, like the quiet companionship of working alongside someone without needing to fill every moment with conversation. In the evenings, they would have dinner together and then walk through town as the sun set, talking about everything and nothing. Orson told her about the mountains, about the way the aspens turned gold in the fall, and how the first snow of winter felt like a blessing. Willa told him about the clothes she dreamed of making, elaborate gowns and fancy suits that no one in Laramie would ever need, but that she liked to imagine creating anyway. On the 5th evening, they were sitting on the bench outside her shop, watching the stars come out, when Orson reached over and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, rough and warm, and Willa found herself leaning into his touch. I should probably head back to the mountains soon, he said quietly. Winter preparations and all that. Willa felt her heart sink. Of course, I understand. But I was thinking maybe you could come visit sometime before the snow comes. I could show you my cabin, show you what my life is like up there. He paused, then added, if you wanted. I would love that. Willa turned to face him fully. But I do not know if I can get away. The shop will survive without you for a few days. The people of Laramie will manage. His hand cupped her face now, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You deserve to have adventures, Willa. You deserve to have a life outside of these 4 walls. "I am scared," she admitted. "Scared of disappointing people, scared of what happens if I stop being useful." Then you find out who values you for you and who only valued what you could do for them, and you let go of the ones who do not deserve you. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. "I value you, Willa Thompson. Not your sewing skills, not your willingness to help everyone. You. The woman who falls asleep at her work table because she cares too much. The woman who reads adventure stories and dreams of fancy gowns. The woman who is brave enough to keep trying even when she is exhausted. That is who I see. That is who I value." Willa felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears. They were the tears of someone finally being understood, finally being seen completely. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered. Orson smiled, soft and tender, and closed the last bit of distance between them. His kiss was gentle despite his size, careful and questioning, and Willa kissed him back with all the longing and loneliness and hope she had been carrying for so long. He tasted like coffee and possibility, and his arms came around her, strong and protective. And for the first time in years, Willa felt safe. When they finally pulled apart, Orson rested his forehead against hers and laughed quietly. "I have been wanting to do that since the first day I walked into your shop and saw you bleeding onto a wedding dress and still trying to smile. I have been wanting you to do it since you left food outside my door and saw me in a way no one else did." Willa reached up and ran her fingers through his long hair, marveling at how soft it was. "What do we do now?" "Now I head back to my cabin and spend the next month and a half getting ready for your visit. And you start figuring out who you can trust to watch your shop while you are gone. Because you are coming to stay with me for a week, and I am going to show you what it is like to wake up without work waiting for you." "A week?" Willa felt panic flutter in her chest. "I have never left the shop for that long. Then it is time to start." He kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Willa felt herself melting into him. "Trust me, Willa. Trust that the world will keep turning without you for a little while. Trust that you deserve this." So she did. Over the next 6 weeks, Willa made arrangements. She hired Margaret Foster, a widow who had some sewing experience, to mind the shop while she was gone. She finished all her urgent orders and pushed back the deadlines on the others. She told her regular customers that she would be away for a week and ignored their surprised protests. And she thought about Orson, about his storm-colored eyes and gentle hands, and the way he had seen past the exhausted seamstress to the woman underneath. She read the books he had given her, and imagined what his cabin might look like, what his life in the mountains was like. She let herself dream of a future that was more than just endless work, and for the first time, those dreams felt possible. When Orson returned in late August to collect her, Willa was ready. She had packed practical clothes and her warmest shawl, and she had left detailed instructions for Margaret about every customer and every order. She felt guilty and excited and terrified all at once, but when she saw Orson smile as she came out of her shop, all the fear melted away. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked. "Ready," she said, and meant it. They rode for most of a day, climbing higher into the mountains, following trails that Willa would never have found on her own. The air got cooler and cleaner, and the sounds of civilization faded away until all she could hear was birdsong and the wind in the pines, and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. Orson's cabin was tucked into a small valley surrounded by towering peaks. It was larger than Willa had expected, solidly built from logs that Orson had cut and shaped himself. There was a small barn for the horses, a well with fresh water, and a vegetable garden that was surprisingly well tended. "This is beautiful," Willa breathed as Orson helped her dismount. "It is home." He looked almost shy as he led her inside. It is not fancy, but it is comfortable. The interior was simple but clean, with a large stone fireplace, a sturdy table and chairs, and a bed in the corner covered with thick furs. There were books stacked on a shelf, tools hung neatly on the walls, and windows that let in the golden afternoon light. It smelled like pine and wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine that made Willa's heart race. "I will sleep in the barn," Orson said quickly. "You can have the cabin." Willa turned to look at him, at this enormous, gentle man who had somehow become the most important person in her world. "I do not want you to sleep in the barn." His eyes darkened with understanding. "Willa, I am not a child, Orson. I know what I want." She stepped closer to him, reaching up to touch his bearded face. "I want you. I want this. Whatever this is between us, I want to see where it goes." He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I want that too, but I do not want to rush you. I do not want you to feel pressured." "I do not feel pressured. I feel seen. I feel valued. I feel like, for the first time in my life, someone is choosing me. Not my skills, not my usefulness, but me." Willa rose up on her toes and kissed him, pouring all her longing into it. "Choose me, Orson. Keep choosing me." He groaned and pulled her fully against him, and Willa finally understood what it meant to feel small in a good way, protected and cherished instead of overlooked. His arms wrapped around her completely, and he kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. They made love as the sun set, and Orson was so gentle with her, so careful, treating her like something precious. Afterward, wrapped in his arms under the furs, Willa felt something settle in her chest that she had not even known was unsettled. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I think I have loved you since you left food outside my door and saw me drowning. I love you too." His deep voice rumbled through his chest and into her. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, Willa Thompson. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary you are." The week Willa spent in the mountains was the most peaceful of her entire life. She woke each morning without work waiting for her, ate leisurely breakfasts with Orson, and spent her days exploring the valley or reading or simply sitting in the sunshine doing nothing. Orson taught her how to fish in the stream, how to identify edible plants, how to find her way by the position of the sun. In the evenings, they cooked together over the fire and talked for hours. Orson told her more about Anna, about their marriage and her death, and the grief that had driven him into solitude. Willa told him about the weight of being needed, about the guilt of taking time for herself, about the fear that she was nothing without her usefulness. "You are so much more than what you can do for others," Orson told her one night as they lay together under the stars. "You are intelligent and kind and funny and brave. You have survived things that would have broken most people, and you did it alone, which makes it even more remarkable." "I do not feel remarkable. I feel tired." "Then rest. Stay here with me. Let me take care of you for a while." Willa wanted to say yes more than she had ever wanted anything, but the shop was waiting back in Laramie, and Margaret could only cover for her for so long. "I have to go back. I have obligations, people counting on me, I know. But you will come back to visit, right? And I will come to town more often. We will make this work, Willa, if you want to." "I want to." She rolled over to face him, tracing the lines of his face with her fingers. "But I do not know how. You have your life here and I have mine in Laramie. How do we bridge that gap?" Orson was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. "You could move here, live with me. We could get married, build a life together. You could still sew if you wanted to, but just for yourself, not for everyone else. You could finally rest." The offer hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying. Willa wanted it so badly she could taste it, but fear held her back. "I do not know if I can. The shop is all I have. It is my mother's legacy, my independence. If I give it up, what am I left with? Me. A life. freedom from the weight of everyone else's expectations. He pulled her close, his arms secure around her. "I am not asking you to decide now. Think about it. See how you feel when you get back to town. But know that the offer stands. I want you here with me, Willa. Not because you are useful, but because I love you and I want to build a life with you." When Willa returned to Laramie a few days later, everything felt different. The shop that had been her whole world for 8 years suddenly felt small and confining. The endless stream of customers with their urgent requests, and their assumption that she would always say yes, felt overwhelming instead of purposeful. Margaret had done a decent job covering for her, but there were complaints. Mrs. Henderson had wanted a dress altered, and Margaret's stitching was not as fine as Willa's. The railroad workers had brought in more torn shirts and had been annoyed that they had to wait. The mayor's wife had stopped by twice looking for Willa and had been openly irritated that she was not available. Willa looked at the pile of work waiting for her, at the shop that had been her prison as much as her purpose, and she felt something crack open inside her. She did not want this anymore. She did not want to spend the rest of her life sewing other people's clothes and neglecting her own needs. She did not want to be the helpful seamstress who never said no. She wanted to be Willa Thompson, a woman who was loved and valued for who she was, not what she could do. Over the next few weeks, Willa began making plans. She trained Margaret more thoroughly, teaching her the finer points of alterations and repairs. She raised her prices significantly, high enough that many customers complained but paid anyway because she was still the best seamstress in town. She started turning down rush jobs and charity cases, and she stopped apologizing for having limits. Some people understood, others did not. Mrs. Henderson stopped speaking to her after Willa refused to make 6 dresses for her daughters in 2 weeks. The railroad workers took their business elsewhere when she insisted on a 2-week turnaround for repairs. The mayor's wife spread rumors that Willa had gotten too big for her britches and did not care about the community anymore. It hurt, but Willa had Orson's words to hold on to, about finding out who valued her for her and letting go of the rest. And she had his visits, every 3 weeks like clockwork, when he would ride into town, and they would spend precious hours together, talking and laughing and making love in her tiny apartment above the shop. On a cold October evening, as the first snow of the season began to fall, Orson asked her again, "Come live with me, marry me. Let me take care of you the way you have taken care of everyone else for so long." This time, Willa did not hesitate. Yes, the word felt like freedom. They were married in a simple ceremony at the church, with only a handful of people in attendance. Margaret Foster stood as Willa's witness, and a trapper friend of Orson's stood as his. Willa wore a dress she had made for herself, the first truly fancy garment she had created for her own use in 8 years. It was pale blue wool with cream lace, and when Orson saw her in it, the look on his face made her feel beautiful. After the wedding, Willa sold the shop to Margaret for a fair price, along with most of the inventory. She kept her mother's sewing machine and her best fabrics, packing them carefully for the journey to the mountains. She said goodbye to the few people who had genuinely cared about her beyond her usefulness, and she did not shed a tear for the ones who had only valued what she could do for them. On a clear November morning, Willa Thompson Oakes rode out of Laramie with her husband, heading toward the mountains and a future she had never dared to dream. The shop that had defined her for 8 years faded into the distance, and she felt lighter with every mile. Orson's cabin was everything Willa remembered and more. She spent her first week as his wife simply settling in, learning the rhythms of mountain life. She cooked meals in the stone fireplace, mended Orson's old clothes because she wanted to rather than because she had to, and set up her mother's sewing machine by the window where the light was best. Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in snow and sealing them away from the world. Willa had worried she might feel trapped or isolated, but instead she felt free. She woke each morning in Orson's arms, ate breakfast without rushing, and spent her days reading or sewing or simply watching the snow fall. Orson was endlessly patient with her, understanding that she was still learning how to rest, how to live without the weight of obligation crushing her. When she felt guilty for not being productive, he would pull her into his arms and remind her that her worth was not tied to her usefulness. When she worried about the people in Laramie managing without her, he would kiss her and tell her that they were managing just fine. Slowly, gradually, Willa began to heal. The tension in her shoulders eased. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She gained weight, filling out the hollow places that too many skipped meals had created. She laughed more, smiled more, slept through entire nights without waking in panic about unfinished work. In the evenings, she and Orson would sit by the fire, and she would sew while he carved wood or repaired gear. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence. And sometimes, Orson would set aside his work and pull Willa into his lap, and they would make love right there by the firelight, with the wind howling outside and the world reduced to just the two of them. "I never knew it could be like this," Willa told him one night as they lay tangled together under the firs. "I never knew life could feel so peaceful." Orson kissed her forehead, his big hands splayed across her back. "You deserve peace, Willa. You deserve every good thing." As winter deepened and the snow piled higher, Willa started sewing again, but this time for joy rather than obligation. She made Orson new shirts with careful embroidery at the cuffs, curtains for the cabin windows, a quilt pieced together from scraps of fabric she had brought from Laramie. Each stitch was a choice, not a burden, and the difference was profound. She also discovered she was pregnant on a cold January morning when she woke up nauseated and dizzy. Orson was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure, immediately trying to wrap her in cotton wool and insisting she do nothing more strenuous than sit by the fire. "I am pregnant, not dying," Willa laughed when he tried to carry her to the table for breakfast. "I can still walk, Orson." "I know, but I do not want you to overdo it. You have to take care of yourself now. Take care of both of you." His concern was endearing, and Willa found herself touched by how protective he was. He brought her fresh water from the well every morning, made sure she ate regular meals, and rubbed her feet in the evenings when they swelled. He talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child stories about the mountains and promising to teach them everything he knew. The baby was born in early September, delivered by Orson's capable hands with only the two of them present. Labor was long and difficult, but when Willa finally held her son in her arms, a perfect tiny human with dark hair like his father, she felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. They named him Oliver, and he was the most beautiful thing Willa had ever seen. Orson held his son with the same gentle care he had always shown Willa, his massive hands cradling the infant like something infinitely precious. He cried when Oliver gripped his finger with a tiny fist, tears streaming into his beard, and Willa fell in love with him all over again. The first year of Oliver's life was exhausting in a completely different way than Willa's years in Laramie had been. She was tired from sleepless nights and constant feedings, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from pouring love into someone who loved you back unconditionally. Orson helped with everything, changing diapers and walking Oliver when he was fussy and singing him lullabies in his deep, rumbling voice. When Oliver was 6 months old, they made their first trip back to Laramie. Willa was nervous about returning, worried about facing the people she had left behind, but she need not have been. Margaret had taken over the shop completely and was doing well, and most of the townspeople were genuinely happy to see Willa looking so healthy and content. There were a few people who made snide comments about Willa abandoning the town or getting above herself, but Willa found she did not care. She had everything she needed in Orson and Oliver, and the opinions of people who had only ever valued her usefulness no longer mattered. They visited Laramie twice a year after that, enough to maintain connections, but not so often that Willa felt pulled back into old patterns. Oliver grew into a bright, curious toddler who loved the mountains and the animals and exploring the valley with his father. Willa sewed clothes for him, and for the occasional commission she took on when something interested her, but mostly she focused on her family. When Oliver was 3, Willa gave birth to twin daughters, Iris and Ivy, who had their father's storm-colored eyes and their mother's determination. The cabin felt crowded with 5 people now, so Orson spent that summer building an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Orson trapped and hunted, providing for his family with quiet competence. Willa sewed and cooked and tended their garden, and raised their children with a patience she had never known she possessed. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, she and Orson would sit together on the porch they had built, looking out at the mountains, and Willa would marvel at how far she had come from the exhausted seamstress who had bled onto wedding dresses and never thought to take care of herself. "Do you ever miss it?" Orson asked one night when Willa was pregnant with their 4th child. "The shop, the town, the work." Willa thought about it seriously. "I miss the satisfaction of creating something beautiful. I miss the feeling of being good at something. But I do not miss the exhaustion or the obligation or the feeling of drowning, and I definitely do not miss sewing for people who did not appreciate it. You still create beautiful things. You just do it on your own terms now. Yes, and that makes all the difference." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "You saved my life, Orson. You saw me when no one else did, and you gave me permission to save myself. I will never stop being grateful for that." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You saved yourself, Willa. I just gave you a safe place to land while you figured it out. You are the strongest person I know." Their 4th child, a son they named Owen, was born during a spring snowstorm, and Willa handled the labor with the calm confidence of someone who had done this before. Orson delivered another perfect baby, and their family was complete. The years passed in a blur of chaos and joy. Oliver grew tall and strong like his father, learning to trap and hunt and survive in the mountains. Iris and Ivy were inseparable, 2 halves of a whole who spoke their own twin language and got into endless trouble together. Owen was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor adventures, and Willa taught him to sew, passing on her mother's skills to the next generation. Willa sewed less as the children got older, too busy teaching them and raising them and managing the endless needs of a large family. But she did not mind. This was a choice she had made, a life she had built intentionally with a man who valued her for who she was rather than what she could do. When Oliver was 15, tall and broad-shouldered and startlingly similar to his father, he asked Willa about her life before the mountains. She told him about the shop in Laramie, about working herself to exhaustion trying to help everyone, about bleeding onto wedding dresses and never having time to rest. "That sounds terrible," Oliver said, horrified. "Why did you do it?" "Because I did not know I had a choice. I thought being useful was the same as being valuable. I thought if I stopped helping people, I would stop mattering." Willa smiled at her son. "Your father taught me that I mattered no matter what, that I deserved to be taken care of just as much as I took care of others. It was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. Oliver hugged her, his long arms wrapping around her easily. I am glad you figured it out. I am glad you found Dad. I cannot imagine our family not existing. Neither can I, Willa said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. 20 years after leaving Laramie, Willa and Orson stood on their porch and watched their children play in the valley below. Oliver, now a young man of 23, was teaching his younger siblings how to track deer. Iris and Ivy, 19 and wild as the mountains themselves, were racing each other across the meadow. Owen, 16 and serious, was sitting under a tree with a book, lost in whatever story had captured his imagination. "We did good," Orson said, his arm around Willa's waist. His hair was more silver now than brown, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting against the sun and smiling at his wife. Willa leaned into his solid warmth, marveling at how lucky she was. She was 48 years old now, her hands marked with scars from decades of sewing, her body changed by 4 pregnancies and years of mountain living. But she was happy. Deeply, profoundly happy in a way the young seamstress in Laramie could never have imagined. "We did very good," she agreed. "Thank you for saving me, Orson." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her face the way they had always been. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for being brave enough to choose yourself. Thank you for building this life with me." They kissed on their porch as the sun set over the mountains. 2 people who had found each other when they needed it most, and had built something beautiful together. Willa had been the seamstress who mended everyone but herself, but Orson Oakes had mended her heart with gentle patience, had shown her that she deserved to be cared for, had given her space to heal and grow and become more than just useful. And now, decades later, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Willa Thompson Oakes could finally say without reservation that she was not just surviving. She was living. She was loved. She was whole. The mountains stood eternal around them, and inside the cabin, dinner was waiting and children were laughing and the fire was warm. It was not a grand life by worldly standards, but it was everything Willa had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to hope for. She had mended everyone else for so long, had given until she had nothing left. But Orson had mended her with patience and love, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing her. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible, the freedom to finally be herself. As they walked back inside together, hand in hand, Willa looked around at her family and her home and the man who had saved her by teaching her to save herself. The needle and thread that had once been her prison were now just tools she used when she chose to, creating beauty because she wanted to rather than because she had to. She had spent 8 years in Laramie bleeding for other people. She had spent the last 20 years in the mountains healing herself, and she had learned the most important lesson of all, that mending her own heart was not selfish, it was necessary. That she could not pour from an empty cup. That love, real love, did not drain you, it filled you up. The fire crackled as they gathered for dinner, 5 people who had become her whole world. Orson caught her eye across the table and smiled, and Willa smiled back, her heart full to bursting. She had been the seamstress who mended everyone but herself. But with gentle patience and unwavering love, her mountain man had mended her heart. And together, they had sewn a life worth living, stitch by careful stitch, until the seams were strong and the pattern was beautiful and everything was finally perfectly whole.